It was early Friday morning, 2 days before Mother's Day. When I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a small vase of tulips from my garden, the air smelled faintly of rain, and I thought about how, in years past, this weekend had always been a warm blur of cards, flowers, and Camille's laugh filling the house. I unlocked my phone and typed a short message. Hi, Camille. Just checking in, are we doing anything special on Sunday? Should I bring dessert? I smiled as I hit send, picturing her response, maybe suggesting brunch or a drive to the coast. The reply came so quickly, my phone barely had time to dim. Oops, we forgot to tell you. I just invited my mill. Only the ones who really matter. You know I read it once. Twice. A third time. My stomach clenched. Heat rising into my face. Only the ones who really matter. I stared at those words until they blurred. She wasn't joking. There was no wink. No softening line to take the sting out. The mug felt heavy in my hands. So I set it down carefully, afraid I might drop it. I'd always known Camille and her mother-in-law were close. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that my own daughter had just told me, in the clearest possible terms, that I was not part of the circle she valued, outside. The rain picked up, tapping against the window. I could see the azalea bush Thomas and I had planted decades ago, now in full bloom, oblivious to the fact that the family it had shaded was no longer intact. I thought about calling her, asking her to explain, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I sat there in the dim kitchen, listening to the rain and feeling something colder settle in my chest. It wasn't just hurt. It was recognition. This wasn't a slip or a misunderstanding. It was a decision, and I needed to decide what to do next. Mother's Day dawned gray and cool, the kind of morning that used to smell like pancakes and syrup when Camille was still a little girl. I woke to silence. No phone calls. No knock at the door. No clatter from the kitchen. The air in the house felt still, untouched, as if it were any other Sunday. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the same table where, years ago, Camille would come bouncing in, carrying a tray she could barely hold. Scrambled eggs, burnt toast, a crooked daisy from the yard in a juice glass. She'd hand me a card filled with bright crayon hearts and her messy scrawl, "Love you, Mom." This year, there was nothing but the steady tick of the kitchen clock. I tried not to check my phone, but the screen lit up anyway. No messages from Camille. It had been this way for a while now. She was always busy, always meaning to call. When we did talk, she brought up her mother-in-law often, how stylish she was, how modern, how she just gets it in ways I apparently didn't. Little comments had crept in over time. How my clothes were a bit old-fashioned. How I still cooked like it's the 80s. Harmless on the surface, but each one chipped away at something I couldn't quite name. And then there were the invitations that never came: birthday parties, holiday dinners, family outings I'd hear about afterward, always an excuse they forgot. It was last minute. They thought I'd be busy, but forgetting me on Mother's Day, that wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. I took another sip of coffee, the bitterness settling on my tongue. If Camille wanted to make it clear I was no longer part of her inner circle, she'd succeeded. The question now was whether I was willing to keep standing outside the door, waiting for her to open it. The quiet of the day made it impossible to ignore the memories threading themselves together in my mind. Each one a small warning I'd brushed aside. It had started subtly. A week would pass without hearing from Camille. Then two, when I'd call, she'd sound distracted, as if I'd caught her in the middle of something more important. "Oh, I meant to call you," she'd say, but the warmth in her voice had thinned. Then came the comments, tucked neatly inside a smile. "You seem tired lately." "Mom, are you sure you remember that right at first?" I laughed them off. Everyone forgets small things now and then, but over time, I noticed how quickly she'd correct me in front of others, how her husband would chime in with a knowing glance, as if my supposed forgetfulness were a shared joke between them. The first real fracture came last December. I'd been expecting Christmas at my house. Like always, a week before, Camille mentioned they'd be keeping it simple that year. Just the two of them with his family. No explanation, no invitation. I told myself it was fine, that young couples needed their own traditions. But the truth was, it felt like a door quietly closing, and then there was last Thanksgiving. I'd been in the dining room, clearing plates, when I heard low voices in the kitchen, Camille and her husband, heads bent close, speaking quickly. The moment I stepped in, they straightened, their conversation dissolving into forced chatter about the cranberry sauce. I remember the look they exchanged, quick and sharp, before it disappeared. Sitting at my kitchen table now, I could see it all for what it was, not isolated moments, but a pattern, a slow, deliberate shift. Each choice placing me a little further away. Mother's Day wasn't the beginning, it was the culmination, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something deeper was driving it, something I needed to uncover before it pushed me out completely. By Monday morning, I'd shifted from hurt to something steadier resolve. If Camille was carving me out of her life, I needed to understand exactly what she thought she was stepping away from. I pulled the thick leather binder from the desk in my study, the one I'd used for decades to keep every important document in one place. Flipping through the plastic sleeves, I found the house deed first. My parents had left me this place outright. No mortgage, no bank involved. It had been in my name alone since the day they passed it to me, and for good reason our family lawyer had advised keeping it separate for tax purposes. Next came the bank statements. Each one a quiet record of years of careful saving. I could trace the history in those numbers, the years I worked extra consulting jobs after retiring early, the investment gains from the mutual funds I'd started in my 30s, the certificates of deposit that matured just when tuition bills came due, Camille's tuition, paid in full, no loans, her wedding caterer, dress, flowers all covered by my accounts, the down payment on the craftsman bungalow she and her husband lived in now. My inheritance, again, pulled from a portfolio I'd spent decades tending like a garden. And it wasn't just the big moments. When their roof needed replacing, I'd written the check. When they wanted a newer car before the baby came, though, that baby never did, I'd co-signed the loan. I'd done it because that's what family does. At least, what I believed family should do. I closed the binder and sat back, my fingers pressed together. I wondered if Camille had ever truly considered where her security came from. Did she think comfort was automatic, that it just appeared, untethered from the years of planning and sacrifice behind it? Or did she know and simply not care anymore? Either way, the facts were clear. She might want to erase me from the picture, but the frame holding her life together was still mine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to know exactly where everything stood and who, if anyone, had been trying to touch it. That meant calling Harold. I called Harold Wexler first thing Tuesday morning. He'd been my financial advisor for nearly 15 years, through market dips and recoveries, through the slow, steady growth of everything I'd worked for. When he picked up, his voice carried that familiar mix of warmth and caution. "Lorraine, it's been a while. What can I do for you? I want a full review," I said. "Every account, every investment, every beneficiary today, if possible." There was a pause on the line. Papers shuffling in the background. "We can certainly do that. But before we go through the numbers, There's something I think you should know. The way he hesitated put my shoulders on edge. About 3 weeks ago, he continued, someone contacted my office asking about adding 2 new names to certain accounts, Camille Whitfield and her husband. The caller claimed you'd been having some memory concerns, and it would be prudent to have extra oversight. The words hit like ice water. Memory concerns. Who made this request, I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. It was Camille herself. Harold said carefully. She wasn't authorized to make any changes. Of course, but she was insistent. We declined and notified our compliance department, but I assumed you knew. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying my breath. No, I hadn't known. And now the Mother's Day snub looked less like cruelty in isolation and more like part of a plan. Send me the list, I said finally. Everything we have, what's in my name, and what's joint. I want it before noon, that night. I sat at my desk with Harold's report spread in front of me, one by one. I moved funds out of joint accounts into new ones in my sole name. I changed online passwords, updated security questions, and revoked every linked device I didn't recognize. I closed credit cards they'd used for convenience and set alerts for any future attempts at access. By the time I was done, the house was dark, my coffee cold, and my hands steady again. Camille thought she was positioning herself for control. All she'd done was remind me exactly how much of it I still had. For 3 days, Camille didn't call, not a word, not a text, to anyone else. It might have looked like the distance she wanted. To me, it felt like the quiet wait in the air before a thunderstorm breaks. I used that quiet well. The morning after I closed the joint accounts, I drove to my attorney's office. Patricia had handled my estate planning years ago, but this time I wasn't there for polite updates. I had her pull my will, and together, we went line by line. I made small but decisive changes, ensuring certain bequests skipped over Camille entirely, unless she met clear conditions I outlined in writing. From there, I headed to the bank. Every automatic payment for household bills was rerouted to my personal accounts. I confirmed that no shared account existed for anyone to dip into while I was at it. I met with the insurance manager. The house policy, which had listed Camille as a contingent point of contact, was updated to name no one but me. Sole ownership, sole authority, no room for helpful oversight. Late that afternoon, curiosity pushed me further. I called the mortgage company for Camille's house, mentioning I'd been considering helping them out. The representative's answer was polite, but blunt. The account was already 33 days past due. So, it wasn't just entitlement. They were already leaning on me without saying it out loud, expecting the Bank of Mom to quietly cover the shortfall when the time came. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, listening to the soft creak of the house settling around me. For years, I'd believed security was a family gift freely given. Now, I was beginning to see it as something else entirely leverage. And Camille had just taught me exactly how dangerous it could be in the wrong hands. I was in the garden, trimming back the lavender, when my phone buzzed in my pocket, the screen lit with Camille's name. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Hello? Her voice was tight, each word clipped. Mom, our card just got declined. We're at lunch. Something's wrong with the bank. I kept my tone calm, almost conversational. Nothing's wrong with the bank. Every account you've used is closed. There was a pause, just long enough for me to imagine her looking across the white linen table at her mother-in-law, the embarrassment creeping up her neck. Why would you do that? We're sitting here and respect, I said, cutting her off. That's the price of access. And right now, you can't afford either. Her breath caught on the other end. A sharp inhale like she'd been slapped. This is petty. No. Camille, this is overdue. I could hear a murmur in the background, her husband. Maybe the server before she came back on. We'll talk about this later. Of course, I said, though I suspect you've said that before. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, packed with all the things she wanted to say but couldn't. Not with an audience. Then the line went dead. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and went back to the lavender. The scent rising with each snip of the shears, somewhere in a polished dining room. Camille was explaining to her mother-in-law why the bill wasn't being paid with a gold-embossed credit card. The image didn't bring me joy, not exactly, but it did bring a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Some lessons had to be felt to be understood. And if Camille still didn't understand, I was prepared to teach her again. It was early evening when I heard the car doors slam outside. 3 sets of footsteps crunched up the front walk, and before I could even cross the kitchen, the door swung open. Camille stepped in first, her husband right behind her, and then her mother-in-law, Marlene, trailing with a look that was half smug, half concerned. Camille didn't waste time. We need to talk. This what you've done is beyond overreacting. I stayed by the counter, folding my arms. What I've done is protect what's mine. Her husband spoke up, his voice carrying that calm but condescending tone I'd heard too many times. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. It's controlling. Lorraine, we just want to help manage things so you're not overwhelmed. I pulled a folder from the counter and slid it across the table toward them. 70% of the assets you've enjoyed all these years are in my name alone. The house we're standing in, mine, paid off long before you were married. Camille, and that car you're driving, purchased from my account without my informed consent? Camille's eyes narrowed. I knew you'd throw that in my face. You've been suffocating me my entire life, always needing to be part of every decision, every plan. I'm married now. You can't keep acting like I'm still your little girl. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. You're right about one thing. I have held on too tightly. I wanted to be part of your life in ways that maybe I should have stepped back from sooner. For a split second, I saw her soften, but then I went on. But there's a difference between setting boundaries and cutting someone out through lies and manipulation. You didn't talk to me about space, you just took it. And you did it while helping yourself to my money. Marlene shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Camille crossed her arms. So what, now? You cut us off completely. I met her gaze. You wanted independence? You'll have it. Financial, emotional, all of it. But independence means you live within your means. On your own terms, not mine. Her husband's jaw tightened, but neither of them spoke. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, as if we were standing on opposite sides of something that couldn't be crossed again. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that might mean. I moved the folder back toward me, closed it, and rested my hands on top. Here's where we stand, I said, my voice low but certain. You have 30 days to repay the money for the car, or we put a repayment plan in writing with interest. From this moment forward, there will be no joint accounts, no shared credit cards, and no financial gifts. If you ever need help again, it will come only after I see consistent respect, not a day before. Camille's mouth opened as if to argue, but I held up my hand. This isn't a discussion. These are the terms. You can take them or leave them. Her husband glanced at her, his expression tight. Marlene shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Camille shook her head. You're unbelievable. After everything I've done for you, I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. After everything you've done for me, Camille, Every major step in your adult life has been made possible by what I've given you. All I'm asking for now is respect and honesty. If that's too much, then maybe this is the right moment to step back from each other." Her cheeks flushed red. "Fine. We'll figure it out without you." She turned sharply and headed for the door, her husband and Marlene trailing after her. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a final gavel. I stayed at the kitchen table for a long moment, listening to the sudden quiet. Instead of the familiar ache that used to follow our arguments, something else spread through me. Lightness. Almost relief. I had drawn a line, and for once, I hadn't rushed to erase it. I stood, gathered the folder under my arm, and carried it back to my study. It was time to decide what came next, not for them, but for me. Weeks later, I was sitting at a weathered table outside a cafe in Cannon Beach, the smell of salt and coffee drifting together in the cool morning air. Across from me were two women I hadn't seen in years, old friends I'd let slip away because I was always too busy being available for Camille. Now, I was the one making the plans. I'd planted the flower beds with colors I loved, not what anyone else preferred. I'd signed up for a beginner's art class at the community center and found myself looking forward to Wednesday nights with paint under my nails. And last week, I'd clicked confirm on a ticket to Italy 3 weeks on my own. No compromises, no negotiations. We sipped coffee and talked about the tides, the best pie in town, and nothing of consequence. It was bliss, no tension, no eggshells, just conversation that flowed as easily as the ocean beyond us. As the breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth, I thought about Mother's Day, the text, the empty house, the confrontation in my kitchen. Camille had tried to make me feel like I was nothing more than an extra in my own life. But somewhere in the middle of shutting doors and changing locks on bank accounts, I'd found something else. I mattered, not because of what I gave or who I gave it to, but because I'd finally chosen to give something to myself. I glanced at the horizon, where the sun had just broken through the clouds, and felt that lightness again, the one that had replaced the old ache. I wasn't sure what the next chapter of my life would hold, but for the first time, I wanted to write it for me.